Welcome, everyone, to this Good Leadership Podcast. My name is Charles Good, your host and the president of the Institute for Management Studies. This podcast is designed to provide you with actionable insights and tools that you can use from discussing the research, stories, and background from recognized experts and practitioners to accelerate your impact in your current role. My goal is what we've discussed today will be immediately actionable and useful to you, and I'd love to hear your comments for this episode about what you're planning on implementing. Today, I'm very honored and privileged to be joined by Beverly Kaye, whose name is internationally recognized as a professional dedicated to helping individuals, managers, and organizations understand the practical how-to principles of employee development, engagement, and retention. She is definitely one of the trailblazers and pioneers in this field. Her books, the majority of which are bestsellers in the fields of career development, include Help Them Grow or Watch Them Go, which have provided overwhelmed managers with a way to blend career conversations into their everyday routines. Her most recent book, Up Is Not the Only Way, was directed at managers and individuals and highlights the career choices that were available other than the traditional path. Thanks, Bev, for joining me.
Nice to be here.
Great. And I love to talk about one of your articles and kind of make that the focus of this episode today, because there's so many things that we can unpack in that one article. Because as the world slowly inches back to post-COVID normalcy, many employees are still asking themselves the following question. Should employees jump ship? Should they grin and bear it? Or should they recommit to their current positions? Do you feel like we're still struggling with that question, Bev? And if so, is there one of those three categories that you think is more prevalent today?
Yeah, I think not only are we suffering on the internal HR manager role with people coming back, I think individuals are suffering with the should I or shouldn't I. And there are some things I hate to leave that I had during COVID, and some things I'm thrilled to leave that I had during COVID. So it is a mixed bag. And it's going to stay mixed, I think, for at least a year or two more.
I would agree with you. And that's those questions that employees are asking. But at the same time, business leaders are asking a very similar question about their workers. Will they resign from their job? Will they resign themselves to a new workplace? Or will they re-sign up?
There needs to be a curiosity about those three choices on the part of every manager. And I don't know, in this rush, chaotic lives we all live, if managers have stopped to think about each one of their people with that question in mind.
I would say probably not. And that's a good question for them to start posing now. You also suggest that maybe bosses should be spending more time asking a different question when they return on how can we keep them, right?
Right. And, return probably means different things. For some, it is return to the office. For others, it's return to doing more than I did before, but I'm still remote. So return isn't I get in my car and drive to an office. It's bigger than that red box, if you will.
You're right. And you mentioned there's two unavoidable truths about the great employee resignation. That's one is that employees will come as they are and whatever mindset they have will follow. And the other is that most leaders, unfortunately, won't have that same luxury, correct?
Right. And I think leaders have to think, and we've been saying this forever, very, very individually. How is Sally coming back? How is Sally? What is she excited about? What does she dread? And Sally's different from Jerry, etc. So it's not a blanket welcome back sign. It's a uniquely individual welcome back.
And I would say too, that with bosses, they have to have an openness as well, and an understanding and a flexibility with the employees coming back that maybe they didn't have prior to.
Right. In a way, COVID has shaken up everything. And we still haven't even seen how it's gonna all land. But we certainly are not the same world we were before.
Agree with you completely. I love the distinction you make with categorizing employees that are returning, and they fall into one of three categories. And we'll go through each one, but it's the returning with burning, churning or yearning, or some combination of the three. Let's talk about returning with burning. Can you unpack that a little bit for us and let us know what kind of employee is like that?
Yeah. And, I'm one who loves to rhyme. You know that. And I love alliteration. And so I fell in love with my own burning, churning, yearning. But burning is there's a fire under me to get back to as much of what I loved as I can. And if I missed the social connection, the turning to my right, to my left, the going to lunch, the all those things that the social connection, even if my return is the 1 day a week, I'm burning for that because I miss it. There's also been a lack of spontaneity. Know what time your Zoom call is, who's going to be on it, you prep for it. And in the workplace, things happened. They still do, but even more so when you're right in the thick of it. And I think people are yearning for the exchange of ideas that comes haphazardly. And yes, it still comes haphazardly on Zoom, but even more so when I see you face to face, or we're in a meeting and we walk out together, etc. And then finally, I think many miss the business of the business, miss the schmoozing, on breaks, miss the cafeteria, etc. So I think many are burning to go back. Many are hoping it will not be exactly the way it was. Although I'll bet many are burning to have it be what I remember it being. And that's where the manager has to come in and say, what do you hope is the same? And what do you hope is different? I'm thrilled to see you again, even if it is the 2 days a week or whatever the organization decided. But remember, if DEI has taught us nothing, it is everybody has a different point of view. And we have to learn what that is. Listen to what they're burning to do. Listen to how you might stoke the fire, with the right pieces of wood, or I never built a fire, so that the fire doesn't go out quickly, as an idea.
So they're burning to get back to the workplace. They're showing that commitment about their company, right? With their jobs, their career. And like you mentioned, they're burning for social connection, spontaneity, the exchange of ideas to reacquaintance themselves with the business. And that's what so it's first understanding their needs. And like what you just stated, then how do leaders welcome them back and reaffirming their values, focusing their fire and bringing burning groups together are great ways, like you mentioned, that they can do that so that they keep them engaged into what we have now, I guess would be described as the new normal.
I love that you really read the article. And then maybe great discussion is for the manager to say, here's what I'm burning to do. Or here's how I'm burning to use your skills differently. I think that is great. Like, I think we want more managers to be real with their people. So tell your people what you're burning to do with them, for yourself. And wouldn't that be a great conversation?
That's so important. I'm glad you mentioned that as well, because it's not only about the employee, but it's also about the leaders in trying to ignite their fire and keep it burning throughout this time when people are coming back. Now, category two is returning with churning. These are the employees who return, but they're unsettled or uncertain about their commitment to the company or to their job or to the career. You provided an interesting stat in the article that you stated that 6% of US workers are preparing to look for new employment opportunities. 80% are concerned about their career development, and 72% say that the pandemic has caused them to rethink their skill sets. I know the article's a little bit dated, but I would argue that these stats and these percentages are probably the same, if not higher, right now.
Right. And the whole thing about rethinking their skill set, because I think many have gained new skills during the COVID period. They've taken courses, they've done things like that, and they want to be able to strut their new stuff. And I think part of the churn is how do I tell my boss, I just learned how to do X? Where can I fit it in? And part of it is maybe I'll never be able to do it. Maybe my boss will see me the old way. So the churn is, I'm not sure I'll be seen differently because COVID changed me. And maybe a good churn question is, how has COVID changed you for the better? How has COVID changed you for the worse? I mean, I wonder if any manager asks that. And it's saying things like, what's keeping you from being glad to be back? And what are you most worried about in the comeback? And I want them to tell me the truth. Are you still weighing the pros and cons? Are you still thinking, I don't know if I want to be here? Because, boy, I don't want to lose you. And I need your expertise. I need your skill set. So I want you to be honest with me. And, sometimes that's very possible. Sometimes, depending on the relationship, it's not. And that's, I think, a biggie.
How about this scenario? A manager might feel a little bit fearful in having that type of conversation because it might be a slippery slope for them. That if they open that door, if they start talking about things, they don't have the right answers. They can't provide the development opportunities, and it makes matters worse. What would you say to comfort the manager to say you still need to have those conversations, and here's why?
And, the question is so important. For instance, the stay interview. Managers who are worried about asking the question, what can I do to keep you? Think every employee will say more money or that other job. And then I'm sorry I opened that door. When really, I think not everybody, number one, asks for that. And number two, manager, you just need to say, I can't deliver on that right now, but I really want to keep you. Tell me what else matters so I can find something I have control over. And maybe that's true for the churn chat as well. I won't be able to fix it all, but the more we talk, the more I'll know what to watch for on your behalf. Because the more an employee returns with churn, the less energy they have for the day-to-day work. And I think that's something for every manager to think about.
I agree with you. I'd love for you just to kind of mention a few comments. I know that it's pretty common, but just for our listeners that don't know what the stay interview is, talk to us a little bit about that to unpack that so they can add that to their toolkit.
Right. Well, check the book, but how we learned it, and we came up with the name 20 plus years ago, was we said to managers, when do you ask people what you could do to keep them? And they all said, well, I ask it at the exit interview. And we said, duh, wouldn't that be a smart question to ask when they're starting? And when they're there for 3 weeks, when they're there for 6 months, when they're there for 6 years. So the stay interview goes on all the time. And the idea is, do you know why your people stay? And if you do not know why they stay, they're going to go and you're going to say, why didn't I see that? So it's data you need about every single employee.
Such a critical question. Everyone should be doing it. I know it's common practice in many companies, but it's so glad you unpacked it. And it's worth stating again for those
Right.
that maybe not have seen the value of it. Because if you don't know
Right.
why they're leaving, then likely you aren't going to be able to correct the problem before it's too late.
Right. And so many people have told me to write it for married couples. And I think
That's
it's
the
a little more dangerous, but honey, why do you stay? Anyway, anyway.
good. So getting back, so the churn people. So what can leaders do? You had mentioned a few. So the next step is for them to, once you've gotten them to identify what's causing the churn, you can identify and initiate or eliminate or revise certain practices and procedures. You also mentioned you could match a churner with a burner, right?
Right. And maybe someone who's got that different attitude. Boy, am I glad to roll up my sleeves again. That would be great. And as a mentor, it's like, let me tell you what I went through in my head about coming back. And let me tell you how I dealt with it. Because I wasn't 100% turned on either. So wouldn't those be some great conversations?
They would be, but just avoid putting two churners together, right?
Right. Because you'll get a wine party without the real wine.
Love
And
that.
we don't want to do that. Right.
Right. So category 3 is returning with yearning. And that's the pandemic has given an employee time and energy to gain new skills, knowledge, awareness, and confidence. Those who were not successful in the training setting have discovered that they can learn more now on their own. They've
Right.
completed courses, certifications that's really differentiated them.
Right.
Whatever their reasons, they're returning, but with a yearning for something else. Unpack that category for us and let us know what leaders can do for this category of employees.
And either your word unpack is a great word. And I use that word a lot. It's like, come from curiosity. Unpack what they just said is the best way of showing them you heard them. So it's like the question that could be easy is, what do you wish was different? What do you hope has changed over the past 2 years? To find out maybe what they're yearning for. It could be more recognition. It could be a chance to use a new skill I picked up during that COVID period. It could be, I hope that we do this particular thing differently. Maybe it's, I hope you don't have us meet every Monday morning, anymore. That those meetings were a drag. And to get someone comfortable enough to say that I yearn for less meetings, wouldn't it be great if people could state that clearly. And if the manager could say, well, what meeting would you most like to drop? We have to not be afraid to ask those kinds of questions.
How many times do you feel, though, that really the employee doesn't know yet the underlying reason that by asking the right questions, you're actually helping them self-discover
Right.
what they're actually yearning for? Is that true in some cases?
Exactly. And the big thing is, if they can't think of it, God, what am I yearning for? They will go home and sleep on it. And there's a psychological theory, I wish I could remember the name of the person, who says, ask a question that's a little unanswerable because the person will go home and sleep on it. And isn't that great? Or go home and talk about it at the dinner table. Even the word yearning, it's not in our natural vocabulary. I don't think churning is either, but it's great dinner table conversation. It's a great family conversation. What are we all yearning for, churning about, burning for? That could be my next article. Yes.
Article and or book, right?
Not book, not book.
No book.
Maybe article, right.
So for the leaders, so they're managing those who are yearning. They need to learn from them. They need to think about small, medium, and large ways to satisfy those yearnings and turn them into wins and for themselves and for the organization. So what are some practical ways in which they can do that?
You know, I might want to say, make me a list. Make me a list of 5 or 10 things that you're yearning for. And come back and share them with me. Or send me them ahead and let me look at them and think, what could be an easy thing for me to make happen or with you make happen? Or what is out of my reach? This is a big one. What don't I understand? I see the words yearning for a chance to run a meeting. Like, what meeting? Why? I never thought you, of all people, would want to run yet another meeting. And maybe we don't say, could you say more about that enough to get deeper? And these are all things that you don't need to be trained to do. You just need maybe a note saying the word say more, use it more, Bev. I don't think we say that enough when we're leading and we have a busy schedule and we think we get it when an employee makes a statement. Oh, I get it. But maybe we don't. So there's a great idea for any manager to get better.
Love that. Understanding how those personal and professional yearnings really can translate into greater engagement too. I mean, this is the critical piece of it, because if they feel understood, if you're trying to identify those and deal with those and connect deeper at a deeper level, like you said, wanting to know more, they're going to be more engaged. You're going to get a higher quality work product, more productivity. They're going to feel like they're a part of this organization, and they're going to move into the other category where they are just excited about being there. They're burning
Right.
to be there and they want to make an impact.
Right. And I love the idea of an employee going home saying, my boss asked me a great question today. And that's delicious. And sharing that with spouse, partner, whoever, eh, just says, I was touched. That's what it says. I was touched by something my boss asked me, even that I couldn't answer. I was touched that it was asked.
I'm in complete agreement. And when you get that connection, it's really about also giving feedback. And I love to unpack just a little bit of giving feedback because leaders still struggle with that. I think more now probably than ever because of the hybrid remote work environment and how that's really impacted them giving feedback, both positive feedback and corrective feedback. And since the opening is always difficult and people fumble over it if they're not skilled at it or don't have a model or a script to go off of, you provide a great framework to kind of match that construct of feedback with the ABC framework. And I'd love for us to just kind of talk about that just briefly. And the A stands for your ability. So talk a little bit about each one, and then we'll kind of, if you have a story that you can relate it to, that'd be great for the listeners.
Right. Well, it came in the book, Help Them Grow or Watch Them Go, when we talked about the importance of feedback in career development. And we say to employees, go get feedback. And that's not enough. So we have to say, don't wait for performance appraisal time. Get feedback on how others see your abilities. When have you seen me at my best? When have you seen me, really delivering on exactly what I was asked to deliver on? What abilities did you see me use? And collect that from a number of people. The B is for blind spots. I think a great blind spot question is, how do my greatest abilities work against me? And I'll tell you, I am creative. I just always have creative ideas. It's why I keep a pad near my bed, because they come in the middle of the night. But when I led a big organization, my creativity worked against me because we had a strategic plan for my consulting company. And I was always saying, but what about this? And what about that? And my leadership team would always say, have you looked at the strategic plan lately? Because you're going off. And I had a hard time quelling it. So knowing how your greatest skill can work against you and when you're overusing it, I think is critical. So it's abilities, blind spots, and conditions. And it's, I think, for everyone thinking, under what conditions do I do my best work? And I know for me, it is when I'm with other people. It is collaboration. Like this very interchange, I'm saying things that I hadn't thought about. And now there are three more things I could talk about, write about. So it's, what are the conditions under which you do your best work?
What happens if you're high enough in the organization and it's really hard to get that feedback because people, for whatever reason, don't feel comfortable in sharing it with you,
Right.
especially about your blind spots? What do you do in that case, or what kind of questions do you ask them?
I would say then go get it from your colleagues. Go get it from your professional colleagues who know you well. And you're right, it is hard to give feedback to somebody one level up, let alone two or three levels up. And that's why I read recently that the most important thing that makes a great manager is self-awareness. And it's a sore spot because many don't have it because they've been protected from it. And I know in my work in career development, it starts with self-awareness. So the more you collect data from others, even others who you know are not going to say positive things, can you stick with it and say to that person who just gave you tough feedback, can you say more about that? Can you give me an example? Because that's where you get those growth producing spurts.
It's
And
just you have to be able to hear it.
in fact, a professor of mine in graduate school, Sam Colbert, used to say, what's a bum rap that's been laid on you? and we all had to think of a bum rep. And then he would say, and what's the grain of truth in that bum rep? And I never forgot that. And I think it's hard. It's hard to say, you're right. I do sometimes. Blah, 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 blah.
For a new manager in trying to give that corrective feedback about someone's development, what would be a tool to get them down the path or the first step so that they're more likely to do it? Because so many leaders are afraid of doing it and they tend then not to do it, and those conversations never happen. Is there a tool or technique that you found or a great story you
Ah,
can relate it to on what's helped the new leader trying to get more confidence in doing that more effectively and more often?
yeah. Yeah. And, maybe it's not leading with, can I give you some feedback? Everybody who says feedback is a gift, I want to say next time send socks. And, maybe it's starting by saying, I know I have to work on this and naming it and saying, so that you name the thing is your soft spot. And then saying, have you seen me do that? I have to do that more myself.
Another thing that I've heard that I wanted to bounce off of you is that they state it as advice instead of feedback, because
Yeah.
advice is more future focused. It's, can I give you some advice moving forward? It's not condemning them from what they've done. It's helping them be more successful moving forward. And in some cases, I found that to be more effective. They're more receptive and it's not in that negative connotation.
Right.
Don't get defensive.
Right. It's a gentler word. And, yeah, advice. I always want advice. It makes you think that way. So that's good.
Now, before we end, I want to get a little bit into, there's so many ways to move up in an organization. And it's just not the normal corporate ladder where you get more promotions. And I love in one of your books, you talk about how career development should look more like a rock climbing wall and not a ladder. And you give some of these truisms with rock climbing that really connect well and are great analogies of things that they can use in their career developments. I love to go through a few of those. Do you think that analogy is still relevant and appropriate today before we get into them?
I think very much so. And I'm not a real rock climber, but I have tried a number of those rock climbing walls. And you never go straight up. At least I never could. You dangle here, you dangle there. You choose because the notches are colored. So you can choose a harder one or an easier one. You could also hang out right where you are and take some time and look around about what your next step is going to be. And, the move that is a one option that I think we ignore is enriching your current job, adding something to right where you are. It's not always I have to step out of and into to get somewhere else. And in Up is Not the Only Way, which I first wrote in 1982. I said there are 6 ways, and they're all about leverage, and they spell lever with 2 R's. There's lateral, there's enrichment, there's vertical, there's exploratory, there's realignment, moving down to get across or into something else, and there's relocation, which is moving out. And a lot of organizations in the early days said, could you leave out the last R? We don't want anybody leaving us. And I would have to argue that it's a viable choice and managers know it. So why not talk about it? And why not, if someone you adore leaves, why not say, I'd love you to stay in touch? because I hate to lose you. And the boomerang employee is happening more and more right now, in fact. So now I've shot my whole wad.
I love the acronyms, and lever is a great one that I've looked at and used quite a bit as well. And I think that's still relevant, as relevant today. Many leaders, even though it's like you stated, it was in that first book, that international bestseller, it's still something that leaders need to be reminded of today, that up is not the only way. There's many different ways you can keep your talent these days. And the lateral adjustments, the backward, the realignment adjustments. I'm using that analogy of a rock wall. I love it because I think it really speaks to that whole approach, right? That
Right.
it's just not going from A to B. There's many ways to get there. You may not want to go to the top. Like you said, you may want to stay right where you're at, or you may need to go down the wall a bit in order to get up in another area.
Exactly. Exactly.
Before we end today's episode, I always like to ask one final question. And it revolves around, what lessons would you give your younger self, or what's one lesson you would give your younger self in regards to career development?
Oh gosh, of me.
Or just one
I,
that comes to mind.
or maybe I would say, Bev, don't try to do it all at once. Small steps count too. And I would remind my younger self that you learn from everything. And to keep saying, and what did I learn from that, is something I tell others, but I don't do it enough for myself.
Wonderful.
So
Thank you so much, Bev, for joining me today.
you're welcome.
Let our listeners know how they can connect with you.
So I just last week revamped my whole website, my brand, etc. So it is bevk.com, and go visit it. Let me know what you think. And there is a way to download an ebook that I made out of that very article, which was originally published in Talent Quarterly. So go on it and download the ebook.
Thank you, Bev. That ebook link will be in the show notes, so make sure you do that. Thank you so much for joining me today. This concludes this episode of the Good Leadership Podcast. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, it can be found both on Apple and Spotify, and can also be accessed on the Institute for Management Studies website at ims-online.com. Until next time, remember, it's not what you know, but what you do consistently that makes a difference.